Hey, good morning. You're on 12a. So the Mishnah, we'll go through the Mishnah again. Metzias b'noi ubitek tanim. Metzias adev shifchoseh knanim. So you have we're talking here about a group of people that find the lost object. If they're children, sons or daughters, or they are slaves or maidservants, or the finder in question is a person's wife. Harei elu shalai, the husband, man, father of the house, gets to keep all these lost objects. So we'll go through each one individually. Okay, however, Metzias b'noi biti hagdolim. Let's say the children are adults. Metzias abdu v'shivchase he'ivrim. If the slave or maidservant is Jewish. Metzia, in other words, they're Jewish slaves. They're not indentured. They're short-term slaves. Or Metzias isha shigersha, or if he divorces his wife, and obviously this seems to be the most obvious. We'll talk about that in a moment. Even if he didn't give her a ksuba, harei shalahen, then they get to keep their lost objects. So let's go through each one. The children, right? The kids, the sons and daughters, the lost objects go to the father. Amr Shmuel. Why is it that if the child finds a lost object, he gets to keep it? The father gets to keep it. Because as soon as a child finds a lost object, he immediately brings it to his husband, to his father, and without delay. Okay. And therefore, their father sort of acquires it that way. Because ultimately speaking, the child will bring it to the father. So the Gemara says, "Remember the Savar Shmuel, Cotton Leslie Schil Lenafshei Midaraisa." Evidently, Shmuel holds that the child can't acquire it. In other words, Shmuel is saying that the child can't acquire it. The child sort of serves as a messenger or as a vehicle of his father, because he's going to bring it to his father. Meaning the child himself can't acquire it. Is that the case? Okay, so now we get to learn the laws of leket, shikha, and peh again, right? We spoke about leket, shikha, peh. You familiar with that? Familiar with that? Leket, shikha. When you plant the field, there are a few things you have to give away to the poor. Peh is a corner of the field. Leket is if when you chop down the bundles, you lost one or two sheaves of grain, stalks of grain. Those the poor person can pick up. Once it's three, he can't pick it. Then you don't have to give it away. And shikha is when you forget a bundle. We talked about shikha a few days ago. Shikha sa'aymer. There's what's left. There's the stalks that fall out, and the rule is stalks and bundles. It's one or two, not three. Three, you can go back and get them.
Actual physical.
So one or two stalks, or one or two bundles. Okay. So you've already tied it together. You chopped it down, but you forgot it in the field. Okay, so now what happens? You have now the rule, by the way, is that a poor man is obligated to give like a shikha and peh as well. He can't keep it for himself. He could, however, make an arrangement with another poor man who lives down the block who also has a wheat field, that each of them will collect each other's like a shikha and peh. That is permitted. So what's the scenario? Somebody hires a worker to cut down his field. This worker, though, is very poor. So what does he do? He has his son walk right behind him, pick up everything that he drops. So Yoket b'nai achrov, his son can pick up things behind him. Let's say the guy was given a portion of the field. Lo yelaket b'nai achrov, his son cannot take after him. Rabbi Yossi says, "Benkach yelaket b'nai v'ishtay achrov." In either scenario, his son or his daughter can take afterwards. They can take leket and shikha. V'amar Shmuel, and Shmuel says halacha Rabbi Yossi. The law follows Rabbi Yossi. So now let's understand. If the guy owns a third of the field, that's no different than owning the actual field, right? If you are hired to work the field and you get paid a third of the crop, then you're an owner of the field. And the law, like we said, is that if you own a field, even if you're poor, you must give leket, shikha, and peh. Now, if it's the case that a person's son cannot acquire anything on his own, everything he acquires goes to his father. So then how can a person allow his son to pick afterwards when he owns a third of the field.
Knowing that's going back to him.
It goes immediately back to him. He's an owner. Effectively, he's taking his own leket, which is not permitted even if he's poor.
Mm.
You got the question?
Well, what if you're the owner of the field, you gave a third to somebody else, and then your son's picking up after them, right?
Also not permitted.
Okay. I thought it's true. Okay.
If you'll argue that a cotton could acquire for himself, so then the son is acquiring for himself. The son is poor, the father is poor, the son is poor. And if the son could acquire for himself, so then the father, it's true that the father owns the field, but the son is not acquiring for the father, he's acquiring for himself. That makes sense. But if you say that the child is picking up for his father, because his father is a part owner in the field and he's picking up for his father, his father is considered a rich man because he owns the field. Why couldn't they pick? Why can they pick up the like behind him? It should be prohibited because their father is wealthy since he's considered to own the field. So Gemara says Shmuel Tamei, Shmuel Tama the Tana Nidan Kamar, Bele Loy Svirle. So Gemara proposed a very interesting resolution. Shmuel is explaining the Mishnah, but Shmuel himself disagrees with the Mishnah. Shmuel is explaining the Mishnah that a child cannot acquire anything. However, Shmuel himself holds a child could acquire things. Okay, so the Gemara continues. Shmuel says the law is like Rabbi Yossi, and apparently Rabbi Yossi would hold that cotton is midiraisa. A child could acquire things on his own. So the Gemara asks, "V'tanam learned in the Mishnah, Mציעא scherachet of cotton yesh b'hamishum gezel nidar kishalom." If a cheresh is deaf mute, shait is deranged, cotton is a child, they find a lost object. You can, if you steal it, then because of the laws of peace, in other words, we don't want people to steal from kids, so therefore it's considered theft. Rabbi Yossi says gezel gomer. It's considered actual theft. It's not just because of enacting peaceful laws. But Rav Chisda explains, gezel gomer midiv ram. It's still rabbinical. Nafkamina lahaitzi b'dayanim. So let's explain. The difference in the two opinions is as follows. Everybody agrees that a chereshite of cotton cannot acquire things biblically. It's only rabbinically that they can acquire things. The rabbis say it's rabbinically that they can acquire things, and therefore people shouldn't take their stuff. And Rabbi Yossi says it's rabbinical that they acquire things. Therefore, if people do take their stuff, then we'll punish those people that took it. You understand the difference? So Rabbi Yossi says it's actually theirs rabbinically, and we treat it as theirs in the courts. And the rabbis say we treat it as theirs, but we won't take it to court. Meaning the law is you can't steal from a child, but if you did, we won't take you to court. Okay, now the fact that Rabbi Yossi says it's only rabbinical. One second, if it's a rabbinical kinyan, then how can a son collect leket after his father? His father owns a third of the field. The son effectively does not own the property, does not own the leket biblically, only rabbinically. If that's the case, we should not allow the son to collect after his father. Yeah. Abaya says, "Asu kamishaholchu ba nemushas nemushas. Daniyem gufayo maski datayo." Okay, so Abaya tries to make an interesting argument. We'll firm it up as we go along. At this point, it's sort of a partial argument. Abaya says so there's an interesting law. The law is as follows. At one point, do you say, let's say a guy's walking through his field in the middle of the winter, and he sees a little bit of leket, that all the poor people walk through his field, nobody found it yet. Can he pick it up and use it or not? As low as he could. When the nemushis are the older, more frail people. They're the last ones to go through the field, and they, typically comb it very slowly, and they find everything. Once the nemushis walk through the field, everyone's allowed to take leket. It's considered ownerless. Tobias says, look, if you have a worker going through a field with his son, everyone knows his son is going to take after him, even though at this point in the Gemara it's against the law. So therefore, everyone gives up, and therefore the son is allowed to take it. Sava breda ech malaktile. So they say that the guy's son is going to take it. So Rav Masa says to Abaye, what do you mean? Is it permitted for a guy to keep a pet lion in his field? And this way you can be assured that no poor people will come collect leket. So in other words, the idea here is, how are you allowed to take your son with you? What you're doing is, by taking your son, you're basically scaring away all the poor people, because they know your son's going to take it, even though it's prohibited for your son to take it. It's no different than raising a pet lion in your fields, scaring everybody away. Rav explains, also Rav says you're right. The law is that a poor person, the law is that the guy who owns a third of the field now, even though he's poor, but technically he owns the field, his son, technically speaking, should not be allowed to collect leket. However, the rabbis decreed that he's allowed to take leket if the guy's actually poor, meaning despite the fact that he owns a third of the field, he's still poor. Then we allow his son to take leket. Why? My time. The poor people want such a decree because they know that if they were hired to cut down the field, their son will also look after them. It's sort of in the mutual interest of all the poor people. We allow their sons to collect after them, even if they own a portion of the fields. Together? Okay. So the Gemara says, Upliga de Rav Chiya bar Rabba, and this disagrees with the opinion of Rav Chiya bar Rabba. Rav Chiya bar Rabba, Rabbi Yechanan. Okay. So Rav Chiya bar Rabba disagrees in the whole Mishnah. Well, certainly according to the interpretation that Shmuel offered. So now the Mishnah, we're offering that the children, the definition of children here means people that are not yet mature. They're under a certain age. And adult children mean that they're over a certain age. However, there's another interpretation of children and adults. And this is more of in this context, the children and the adults are spoken of metaphorically. What is the actual definition? A child is somebody who eats at his father's table. And an adult is someone who's independent. Once you pay the bills, then your father doesn't get to keep your lost objects. If you're not paying the bills, your father gets to keep it. Okay. Adult doesn't mean an adult literally, and a child doesn't mean literally a child, meaning someone who's before the age of maturity. An adult that eats at his father's table, meaning his father is still paying his bills, that's a child. Even if he's a child, but he's not being supported by his parents, then he is considered an adult with regard to this law, that he can keep his own lost objects. Okay, okay, so let's go through it and explain. With regard to an indentured servant, anything an indentured servant owns is owned by his master. That's why that includes a lost wallet that is found by the indentured servant. Okay, the only way, by the way, as an aside, the only way for an indentured servant to own anything is if somebody gives it to him on a condition that his master has no rights over it. Okay, a woman's lost object, a woman's sudden wealth goes to her husband, meaning she found something. Why is that? Because the laws of Ava, not to create animosity between a husband and a wife. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. Okay, now we talk about a Jewish slave. So here's the problem: a Jewish slave gets to keep his own findings. So Gemara says, "Amai, why is that? Lo yehei poil. He should be a worker." The Tanya we learned, Metzias poil atzmai.
What line are we on?
We're at the 2 dots, less than a quarter down the page.
Okay.
10 lines down. Okay, if you hire a worker, and you hire him in a very general sense, then anything that he finds belongs to you. Anything that he finds, meaning on work time. When is this true? I'm sorry. Yeah, so a worker gets to keep his own lost objects if he has a very specific task. But if he's given a general assignment, you'll be working for me for the day. Then the owner gets to keep his lost objects. Okay, if that's the case, let's examine. When you buy a Jewish slave for 6 years, is that a specific task or a general task?
It would be general.
Clearly, it's a general task. He's always available to work for you for the next 6 years. So then, well, if he finds something on work time, then it belongs to you. Just like any other worker finds something on work time, also belongs to you.
Rents him out to somebody else for a specific task.
Same thing.
Difference?
No.
Well, it's different in that he's always working.
Yeah.
Is that the idea?
Because he's always working. So the lost item should go to the master, not to the slave. What's the explanation of the Mishnah? What does the Mishnah say? He goes to the slave, not to the master. So okay, so now we go to the most lucrative Talmudical profession. What is the most lucrative Talmudical profession? A Noikiv Margolius. A Noikiv Margolius is somebody who drills pearls. So this guy is like, he's like the senior partner at the law firm. He's billing at like $1,500 an hour. This is what the pearl driller is earning. So now, the guy who buys a pearl drilling slave, clearly he wants him to drill pearls. And if the guy is walking down the street and it happens to see a wallet, it's probably not worth the guy's time to pick it up, since his time is so precious. If he does pick it up on work time, so then he pays the master for wasting his work time, and he gets to keep the lost objects, because the master doesn't want him picking up lost objects. Okay. Next opinion. Rava Omar. Rava says, Metzia im malachta askinan. We're talking about a guy who has a job. Let's say his job is a street sweeper, right? So he's got to sweep the streets, and he has to pick up the garbage and put it in the garbage can. Okay, so therefore, while he's sweeping the streets, he could easily find a lost object. So he doesn't waste time. He's not spending his master's time keeping the lost object. That's why he gets to keep it. Rav Papa Amar, Rav Papa says, he hired the guy to find lost objects. Okay, how exactly is that possible? Hey, Chidami, how is this possible? The Akfi Agma Bekafri. This happened, by the way, today as well. What happened was the riverbank it was a very high tide, and then there was a sudden low tide. And there were and based on the topography, there were a lot of fish that were caught in the tide pools. So now there's a wealth of fish to catch. So he sends now these fish are metzias, they're lost objects, effectively. It's no different than finding wallets on street corners is finding these fish and taking them home. So he hires the guy to collect all the fish. So obviously the master gets to keep all the fish. 1 second. Right. In other words, Rav Papa is saying that when you hire a worker to find lost objects, that's when he gets to keep the lost. That's when the master gets to keep the lost objects. But in general, Rav Papa disagrees with the whole idea that a regular slave gets to keep, that a regular worker gets to keep lost objects. The same is true of a Jewish slave. According to Rav Papa, the general position is that you could keep that a slave or a worker can keep lost objects they find in the job, except if they were hired to find lost objects, in which case then the master or the employer gets to keep the lost objects. Okay, next Gemara. Okay, so we mentioned a shifcha, a maidservant. There's just one technical problem here. A maidservant has a very limited window. You can only buy her at 6 years old, right? And she leaves as soon as she turns into an adult. So, hey, Chidami, what's the facts of the matter? If she's an adult, she's physically mature, she's begun puberty. So, what's she doing in the house? She's free. As soon as she starts maturing, she can leave. And if she's not mature yet, so if her father is still alive, so then her lost objects should go to the father. Remember, like we said before, a child's lost objects go to her father. So too, even though she's a maidservant, why does she get to keep it? It should go to her father. The Ida lets it out lav if she doesn't have a father, so take Misas Av. So then she should the Amr Shlakish, Amr Vria Kana Atzim Misas Av. Mirshus Adam Mikal V'Chaimer. Rish Lakish makes this argument that if a let's listen closely to this. If a girl is sold as a slave from 6 years old and then her father dies, says Rish Lakish, her father dying when she's sold as a slave to somebody else should be sufficient to free her.
This is, I guess, so he dies after she becomes a maidservant.
Correct.
And then she's free?
So then she should go free because of a Kal V'Chaimer. I'm not going to go through the whole Gemara and Kedushin. We discussed it previously, but the Gemara says that this is logical. Well, just give me a second. Give me a second. Okay, so the Gemara says this seems to contradict Rish Lakish. So the Gemara says, well, anyway, by the way, V'lavi Taisav Rish Lakish. The Gemara and Kedushin pointed out that Rish Lakish was mistaken. So the Gemara says, so let's say that our Mishnah is also another question of Rish Lakish. So the Gemara says, no, our Mishnah is not relevant. The father is still alive. When the Mishnah says, in other words, she's a maidservant, her father is still alive. When we say it belongs to her, it means it doesn't belong to the master. It belongs to the father. It doesn't actually mean it belongs to her. Obviously, because she's a child, it would go to her father. Good? Okay, a guy divorces his wife gets to keep any lost object she finds. Kind of obvious, right? Girsha Pshita, obviously. So what are we referring to? But Migureshes for Aina Migureshes, where she's divorced but not divorced. What does that mean? He gave her a divorce, and it's questionable whether or not the divorce was valid. The Omer of Zera, Omer Shmuel, Rav Zera says in the name of Shmuel, any scenario where the rabbi said she's divorced and not divorced, so then the husband is obligated to support her. Hill, show me for a glass of water.
Hot, cold.
Hot. So any time where you have this doubtful divorce, the rabbis say finish the divorce, and because of that, they penalize the husband until he actually ensures that she's certainly divorced. He still has to support her. So I might think if he has to support her, maybe her lost objects go to the husband too. Samara says no. Why not? Why do the rabbis say that a woman's lost objects go to the husband? So there shouldn't be animosity in the house. Meaning, for example, the woman finds $10,000 in the street corner. She's going to live it up, and her husband is a pauper. So therefore, we said it should go to the husband. They should both enjoy it. However, in the scenario,
Property kind of approach.
sorry,
Community property kind of approach for the sake of one buys.
Or a divorce.
yeah, not entirely. Oh, exactly.
The ship or sale.
1 second. No, Jared. That would be in a normal case.
Yeah.
But over here, because they're already partially divorced, so to the contrary, we do want them to hate each other. We want them to get divorced, finish the divorce. We don't want them putting everything in one pot and sharing finances again. So therefore, because even though in a doubtful divorce, the husband is still obligated to continue supporting his wife, but the wife is not obligated to give her lost object to her husband because we want them to finish the divorce. Okay. Good. Let's continue. Let's try to catch up a little bit. What was that?
Out damn spot.
Sorry?
Out damn spot.
Okay. Matzah Shtar Chayiv. A guy finds documents. Okay, so now we'll just review in a moment. We'll review briefly how the system of liens of property work. But the Mishnah on 12a. The guy finds documents. Im yesh behen achrayis nechasim. Achrayis means responsibility. We'll explain that in a moment. So lo yachzer, you can't return the document. Shebezin from him because the court will use the documents to collect. However, ein behen achrayis, if there's no responsibility, ein behen achrayis nechasim, no responsibility, yachzer she'ein bezin from him because the court will not collect from them. Divrei Meir, it's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis say from him because either or the court will collect from them. So let's explain the system of how things work. If you bought, let's talk about Shimon. Okay. Shimon has a lot of property. He borrows money from Reuven. Okay, let's say Shimon, for example, has 3 properties. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. And the reason why they're called 1, 2, and 3 is because the value of each property is $100, $200, and $300. We're together, Eric?
Yes.
Okay, now Shimon goes ahead and borrows money from Reuven. He borrows, let's say, $300. Okay, so now he owes that $300. There's a lien on his property. Shimon goes ahead and starts selling his field. He sells the $300 field to Levi and the $200 field to Yehudah. So because he borrowed money from Reuven first, let's say he borrowed money from Reuven in Nisan, and then he sold to Levi in Sivan, and sold to Yehudah in Tishrei, let's say. So what happens is it comes time for Reuven to collect. Reuven looks at the assets, it's only $100 worth of assets. So obviously the first $100, that's collected first. Then Reuven says to Levi, Reuven is forced to go to Yehudah. Yehudah is the second buyer, right? He can't go to Levi. You can't go to Levi before going to Yehudah, because Levi predates Yehudah. Levi bought in Sivan, and Yehudah bought in Tishrei. So he goes to Yehudah and he takes away the property. Yehuda's property here is called Mishubadim. It's Mishubad. Yehudah is called a Lekuchais, buyer. Mishubad means it's on lien.
I see. All right.
Property to lien. And therefore, Reuven is able to collect from Yehuda's. And so Reuven's loan predates the sale to both Yehudah and to Levi. So Reuven will be able to must collect from Yehudah first, $200 property, because Yehuda's property was bought after Levi's property. So that prioritizes Yehudah for collection over Levi.
Regardless of amount.
I'm sorry?
Regardless of amount.
Correct. And therefore, we say that Yehuda's property is called Mishubadim. By the way, Levi's is also Mishubad. We'll get to that in a moment. And we collect from it. Yehudah, we call Yehudah Lekuchas. Yehudah and Levi are both Lekuchas, and their property are Mishubad. We might say that this loan is Yesh B'hen Achrayas. There is responsibility here because the properties of Shimon are indebted to Reuven, regardless of who owns them. Let's say, for example, Shimon borrowed money from Reuven, not in the amount of 300, in the amount of 600. He can collect from everybody, right? Okay. Let's say now that Shimon starts selling his $600 worth of property, right? 3, 2, and 1. 300, 200, 100. Shimon sells a $300 property to Yehudah in Nisan. Okay, in Iyar, he sells $200 worth of property to Levi. Okay, and then in Sivan, he borrows $500 from Reuven. Reuven can only collect from that $100 property, no matter who owns it. If Shimon owns it, or if Shimon sells it after the fact, then he can collect from whoever bought it, from the Lekuchas, the buyers. However, he cannot collect from Yehudah or Levi or Yehudah, because Levi and Yehuda's sale predate the date of the loan. You together on that? Make sense? Okay. Now, these features are very important for the next Gemara. Okay, so now the idea is very simple here. You find an object, you find a document that has responsibility, meaning you could collect from the borrower's property, no matter who owns them. So you can't return the document because it will be used to collect from property against the will of the buyers from the borrower. If, however, there is no responsibility, meaning only the borrower is responsible, nobody else is responsible. In other words, the document did not specify that the fields are meshubed. So then Rameir says you could return the document.
And you're the one looking to benefit.
Me as
Like, so you found a document, so I'm.
no. So we're talking about returning the document to the lender.
So the
We'll get to it.
lender can collect from the borrower.
Yeah.
not
So
from the borrower,
let's begin right away. So now we have the obvious questions. Ma'askin, what are we referring to? Are we talking about where the borrower admits the document is still valid? So kiyesh ben achrayas nechasam amayla yatzner hamayda. Even if there's responsibility, the borrower is admitting to not paying the loan. Well, why wouldn't we return the document to the lender? The borrower is admitting he owes money. If the borrower is not admitting, even if there's no responsibility, how can you return the document to the lender? The lender the borrower claims the document is not valid. Claims maybe that he already paid and he lost and the document was given to him as a receipt. In other words, the original loan document was given to him as a receipt. And before he had a chance to rip it, what happened? It got destroyed. One second. One second. One second. While it's 1 second.
Are we the
Well,
last one yet?
We're the last Gemara, about 8 lines on the bottom of the page. While it's true that you won't collect from mishubadim properties, from properties that are now no longer in the borrower's domain, the borrower's already sold them off. You still have, even if there's no responsibility in the document, you can still collect from the properties that weren't yet sold, from the borrower's properties. If the borrower does not admit that the document is an authentic document, how can you return it? So Gemara says, referring to here where the borrower admits the document is valid. Okay, so what's the concern here? Okay, so the concern here is as follows. I gave you the story before of Shimon that borrowed from Reuven in Nisan and then sold his property in Sivan and Tammuz. And I also gave you a scenario where he sold his property in Nisan and Iyar and borrowed money in Tishrei. What's the difference between the two scenarios? Whether or not you can collect from the property that was sold in the interim. So here's the concern. Because you found the document on the floor, we're concerned that maybe the document was written in Nisan, but he didn't actually borrow money until Tishrei. And therefore you cannot collect the lekuchais, the buyers, until Tishrei, not Nisan. The Gemara now questions the obvious, which is if this is such a concern, then every single document, the same concern exists, right? In every document that you find, that any document was ever written, who says the date is accurate? So the Gemara says, no, it's a little different. Most documents, they have a presumption of validity, and presumably whatever says in the document is valid. But over here, once it fell down, it means somebody who acted irresponsibly. We're concerned that maybe the reason for the lack of responsibility in holding on to the document is because there's an error in the document, and the document isn't really what it's made out to be. Okay, so the Gemara says, this is what we learned. You can write a loan document to the borrower even if the lender is not present. Even such practice is permitted. The Gemara says, hey, how are we allowed to write such a document? Let's be concerned that he's writing the document in Nisan, but the loan will not be administered until Tishrei. And then you'll be collecting from buyers without proper permission. So there's two main ways to go here. One idea is to say that there are two types of loan documents. One type of loan document is such that it says that from the date of this document, all my assets are meshubed. They all have a lien to you, even if the loan isn't administered until a later point. If that's the case, the document is still valid, even if the loan wasn't given. That's one way to resolve this. The other way to resolve this is Abaya, which Abaya is going to say that anytime you write a loan document, in effect, that's what you're doing, even without writing it. In effect, the lien starts from when the document is written, whether or not the loan was administered. You're agreeing to a lien from when you write the document. Again, one opinion is it has to be written as such specifically. We call that a shtori hakna. I am creating a lien right now for when, and the loan is effective now whenever the loan is given. And the second way to do it is, that is the presumptive nature of every single document. The lien always begins from the date of the document, whether or not the loan was issued.
Can't be retroactive.
What?
Can it be retroactive?
Correct. If it was written incorrect, if at the time it was predated, that would be forbidden, and there would be no lien. No lien would exist. That's correct. Okay. So let's continue. B'shtar hakna. We're talking about shtar hakna, the hashabed nafshe, where he's agreed to it. So that, in other words, this, why is this not a concern in the Mishnah? Why does the Mishnah say you're allowed to write a loan document? Because the loan document specifically states that the lien begins immediately, even if the loan isn't given till a later point in time. Goods? That's the first resolution. The Mishnah, right? Going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you can't give it back, even if the borrower admits. Why? Because because maybe he wrote the document in Nisan and didn't issue the loan until Tishrei. And he's going to collect from the buyer against the laws. He's going to collect from Nisan, even though the loan wasn't given until Tishrei. Nextly, so let's look at the document. If the document says in it, I'm going to predate the lien, so then there's no concern that the document contains a predated lien. It says so in the document. It is a predated lien, and that's the agreement. And if it isn't in the document, right, so then nobody would write such a document. Again, you could, the only permission you have to write the document before the loan is issued is when you write specifically in the document that the lien begins today. If that's not written in the document, obviously it was never written early. It must have been written on time. There's no concern that the guy will be collecting from the buyers of the borrower without proper authorization. So in a nutshell, the response is no. Once you lose the document, then we have all the suspicions in the world, and we're concerned that the document was written illegitimately, and therefore we don't return it. Okay, let's see that inside.
Do we assume that is damage to the document as well?
One second. Ravasi says, "Alfagav the story the lavak no," even though there's no, this document does not have in it written that the lien begins from the date of the document. Kileka milva badei loikas finan. The truth of the matter is, we typically would not predate a document. However, masnisin kiven denafel is for leiv chashinan dom ikri v'kosef. The Mishnah were concerned that the document was written illegitimately. The fact that the document was lost indicates to us that there might be a problem with the document, and now all of a sudden we're suspicious and we're concerned maybe the document was written without proper authorization. Meaning it was written today, given 3 months later, without a hakna, without a lien dated today, the date it was written, and yet it was written without authorization. Should never have happened. Should never have been written.
Yeah, but document just suddenly shows up. I mean, there's gotta be suspicion, right?
Exactly. Once the document suddenly shows up, it's automatically suspicious.
Damage to the document instead of just losing the document? Is it
Not necessarily. And the reason for that, in general, and then my own, I would suggest my own explanations. First of all, damage can happen for a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with the owner. For example, the Gemara points out that apparently rats used to eat through their documents. Maybe they still do.
Yeah.
They just don't get access to the documents. So it's hard to say that, that's not obvious. Obviously, it's not a lender's fault. So it's the rule
of it is a clear sign that there.
But if he loses it in the street in public, yeah, that's a sign of
Stored
negligence.
carelessly.
Okay, let's just continue for the next because we already started this. Abaya says, "Edav bechasuma of zachanlei." Like I explained to you before, Abaya holds that every loan document has its presumption. From the date the document is written, that's when the lien begins, whether it's written as such or not. By the witnesses signing, they acquire the lien for you. Even if the document does not have it written specifically that the lien begins from today. Because Abaya has this question. Because if it, in other words, according to the first opinion, that would be the opinion of Ravasi. 1 second. According to Ravasi, if the document did not have a hakna, if you didn't specifically write out the lien immediately, as due the date the document was written, so then we wouldn't write the document unless the borrower was present, meaning the loan was, I'm sorry, unless the lender was present and the loan was issued. Like us, we wouldn't write it. So then, we would not be concerned even if we found the document on the street. We would not assign that suspicion. Okay, so how does Abaya now? A guy finds a divorce, he finds a shichur, that's an emancipation document. Daitiki is a will of a debt of basically a man about to die. Matana is a gift, that's of a healthy person. The shayvrim is a receipt. Hareza lo yachzer. You can't return these documents. Why? Maybe they were written. And then he changed his mind and decided not to give them. So the Gemara says, so now the question of Abaya is, what do you mean? Abaya is saying that the witnesses acquire the lien. Well, as soon as these documents are written, that effectively Abaya is saying that the document self-executes immediately. Well, what about all these documents self-executing immediately? So Gemara says, no, there's a distinction. These documents are different. A loan document, you can execute the lien immediately. But a gift, you actually have to give the gift. An emancipation, you have to give the emancipation. A will, you have to give it. Unless they were given, these documents could have been written in case of emergency and never actually used.
Isn't that emancipation have some similarities to get, right?
Same thing is true of divorce, exactly. Emancipation and divorce are they're very similar documents. Right. As a matter of fact, oftentimes the Gemara actually calls emancipation a get. Is a get nashim and a get shechor. Okay. So the Gemara says, so according to Abaye, let's wrap up with this. How do we explain the Mishnah? We explain the Mishnah is where the borrower admits to the loan. We explain the Mishnah here. The concern is that maybe he borrowed money, maybe the document was written in Nisan, but he didn't actually borrow until Tishrei. But according to Abaye, there's never such a concern. Because if the document is written in Nisan, the lien is effective Nisan. There's no such concern. So what is the concern? According to Abaye, how do we learn the Mishnah? Abaye explained the concern here is that even though the borrower is admitting that there's an actual loan here, we're concerned the borrower is lying. He made a deal with the lender. They're gonna collect money against the law and split the proceeds amongst themselves. So that is why you can't collect. Okay, have a great day.